Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Etchberger. I'm a retired licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the 93rd Pennsylvania in the Gettysburg Campaign, as this title slide shows. Tramp, 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 the boys are marching. The 93rd Pennsylvania is the Lebanon Infantry. It is a very important fighting regiment. It is one of William F. Fox's 300 fighting regiments. There were 1,908 men who enrolled in the 93rd. Of that number, 641 of them were killed and wounded. The 93rd carried two battle flags with it, national colors, during its time in the Army of the Potomac. The first flag it used from November the 5th, 1861 through January the 1st, 1864. On that flag, they stitched the names of the following battles: Yorktown, Williamsburg, Fair Oaks, Malvern Hill, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Marie's Heights, Salem Heights, Gettysburg, Rappahannock Station, and Mine Run. On January 1st, 1864, they got a second national colors. They carried that through to the end when they were mustered out on June 27, 1865. On that flag was stitched the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, North Anna, Totopotomoy, Cold Harbor, Petersburg, Fort Stevens, Charlestown, Opequon, Fisher's Hill, Cedar Creek, Petersburg, Fort Fisher, Petersburg, Main Assault, Sailors Creek, and they were there at the very end, Appomattox Courthouse. So this is a very, very distinguished fighting unit. I have a personal family connection with the unit. My great-great-grandfather, Cornelius Dunley, was a member of the 93rd. He was not in the Gettysburg Campaign. He joined in February of 1864, as did his brother, my great-great-uncle John. Their first combat was the Wilderness. That was also Uncle John's last combat. On May the 5th, he was mortally wounded. He will die of that wound on May the 10th, 1864. So the 93rd is a very distinguished fighting unit. What I want to do to start here is take a look at Army organizational charts. Many of you that are on here tonight with me understand and know an Army organizational chart, but possibly there are some who don't. Of course, we start with the Army. Armies are divided into corps, corps divided into divisions, divisions divided into brigades, and the brigades are divided into regiments. So as you can see, the 93rd Pennsylvania, along with all the other regiments, are on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th level of the organization. When a regiment is formed, if it is recruited to its full strength, it will be 1,000 men and 37 officers. A regiment at full strength is divided into 10 companies of 100 men each. Now, what I'd like to do is add some specific terms to this organizational chart here. Of course, we have the 93rd in the Gettysburg Campaign fighting in the Army of the Potomac under the command of Major General George Meade. We go to the corps level. There are 7 infantry corps in the Army of the Potomac in the Gettysburg Campaign. The one in red, the 6th Corps, is the one that the 93rd is a member of. Really? The 6th Corps is under the command of Major General John Sedgwick. Now, the 6th Corps at Gettysburg has 3 divisions. You can see red, white, and blue crosses. Those are the colors that each division's cross would be. The 93rd is fighting under the blue cross of the 3rd Division, commanded by Major General John Newton. We're going to have a change in command here because of an incident that happens in Herbst Woods somewhere between 10 and 10:30 a.m. in the morning of July 1st, when 1st Corps Commander John Reynolds is killed. For the remainder of the day, General Abner Doubleday will be the commander of the Union First Corps. But that evening, George Gordon Meade will put him back into division command, and he will promote John Newton to being First Corps commander. That means that the 3rd Division is then under the command of a general named Frank Wheaton. Wheaton had been the commander of the 3rd Corps, or the 3rd Brigade, excuse me, which the 93rd is a member of. Wheaton's place will be taken by a colonel, David J. Nevin. Now, we go to the regiments in this brigade. There's the 93rd. Its sister regiments are the 62nd New York. Colonel Nevin had been the commander of the 62nd New York. That's the last basically we'll hear of him in this discussion. The other sister regiments are the 98th, the 102nd, and the 139th Pennsylvania. The 93rd is under the command of a major at Gettysburg, Major John I. Nevin. No relation to the Colonel Nevin, who is now commanding the brigade. This particular change in command is not a result of anything that happens on the battlefield at Gettysburg. This change of command took place about a year before and is a wonderful part of the 93rd history, or a strange part of the 93rd history, depending on how you want to interpret it. The colonel of the 93rd was the fighting parson, Colonel James Mccarter. Mccarter is on his horse at the Battle of Fair Oaks in 1862 when an artillery shell explodes someplace right in front of the nose of his horse. The horse's head and neck are blown off. Mccarter is soaked in the horse's blood. He is thrown into the air. His uniform and his sword on his left side are blown away, and he is unconscious on the ground. Whether the concussion of the shell knocked him out or whether his landing on the ground knocked him out, when he finally comes to, it's discovered that he has no other bodily harm, but he's in shock and, as you can imagine, traumatized by this incident. A few weeks later, Colonel Mccarter will be brought up on charges for being drunk on duty. Going through what he went through, possibly taking a drink is one thing, but was he really drunk? Well, in his court-martial, one of the doctors testifying in his behalf said that he had been administered opium for his problems, which included partial paralysis on the left side, and maybe the opium was making him seem as if he was drunk. This will be an ongoing argument within the unit. Colonel Mccarter will be with the 93rd during a portion of the Gettysburg Campaign, but he does not go with them to Gettysburg. This is the man that is commanding instead. Well, now the Gettysburg Campaign. Our beginning date is June the 3rd, when Confederate forces start to move out of their trenches around the Fredericksburg, Virginia area and head north. The normal ending date for the campaign is July 14th, when Robert E. Lee and his survivors of the Army of Northern Virginia recross the Potomac River. Our personal ending date for the 93rd is July the 25th. That is when the unit finally drops anchor in Warrenton, Virginia. So what we're going to be talking about here with this Tramp, Tramp, Tramp is a more than almost a 2-month period of time. Now, as we all know, the main dates of the Gettysburg Campaign are July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. The main date for us is going to be July the 2nd, the second day. The second day at Gettysburg is the worst day. The Battle of Antietam in September of 1862 produced in one day approximately 23,000 casualties. It's the single bloodiest day in American military history. Look at the figures I have here for July the 2nd, 1863. Within 3,000 men of that single bloodiest day, and this is just the middle day of the Battle of Gettysburg. The 93rd will arrive at Gettysburg on July the 2nd, and they will be marching into this horror show in progress. Just to give you a little bit of a comparison of how terrible this casualty rate is, notice I have written here American casualties. They're all Americans, whether they are fighting for the United States of America or whether they're fighting for the Confederate States of America. They are all Americans. The comparison I'd like to make is with June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Normandy invasion. On D-Day, American casualties, from the source that I used, number 6,603. That's roughly a third of what we're looking at here of American casualties on July 2nd at Gettysburg. On D-Day, out of those American casualties, 1,465 were killed. At Gettysburg on July the 2nd, 3,400 to 3,650 Americans are killed. Once again, about 1/3 at D-Day compared to this. If we look at all the Allied casualties for June 6, 1944, we get 10,377 casualties. That's still 9 to 10,000 below American casualties on July the 2nd. So you can see this is obviously a terrible day and a terrible fight for the 93rd to be marching into. And there's the key, marching into. Tramp, 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 marching. If we take a look at this slide closely, we'll see that I've divided it into 3 segments. The 93rd will begin marching towards Gettysburg from the Fredericksburg, Virginia area. North to Manchester, Maryland, they will cover 124.4 miles. From Manchester, Maryland to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which is a 36-mile mark, and I have here their historic march. Get into that more in just a couple of minutes. And then after the battle is over, from Gettysburg back to Warrenton, Virginia, is 97.1 miles. This is an inaccurate total, using today's modern roadway mileage, of 257.5 miles that the 93rd will march during the Gettysburg Campaign. There are units who marched more, especially some of the Confederate units. More or less, I'm not in favor of having to march 257.5 miles. Now, I want to take a look here on this slide at the heart, the most serious part of their marching. On June the 26th, and we're going to move up on this page because they're hiking north. So we'll go from the south to the north here on this. On June the 26th, they are in Drainesville, Virginia. On the 27th, they march to Poolesville, Maryland. The 28th, they march to Hyattstown, Maryland. The 29th, they march to New Windsor, Maryland. And on the 30th, they will finally arrive in Manchester, Maryland. The next day, July the 1st, which is the first day of the battle, the 93rd, the 6th Corps that they are members of, have no marching orders. They get a day off, a day to rest their feet in Manchester. And they deserve that because from Drainesville to Manchester, Maryland is 85.1 miles. On these 4 days of marching, they were averaging back to back to back to back 21.2 miles of marching a day. If we just look at the numbers, we lose the perspective of what these men might have been going through. Now, I'm going to leave the numbers up here, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what this march must have been like for them, because it certainly wasn't a pleasant family hike. It wasn't a pleasant Boy Scout hike. It was a miserable march, day after day. The 6th Corps numbers approximately 14,000 men in the Gettysburg Campaign. Stretched out on any given road, the 6th Corps, from the first man to the last man, spans a distance of about 10 miles. When they start marching on any given day, the last man is only going to get marching about 6 hours after the first man starts. So this is a long, elongated line anytime it's finally on the road marching. And what's it like for these men? Well, they're wearing woolen uniforms. Now, that might be nice if you're marching in the winter, but that's certainly not nice if you're marching in the summer. The woolen uniforms are augmented by the fact if these guys are wearing their proper underwear, their undershirts are long sleeve. If they're wearing their proper drawers, those are also long down to the ankles, made out of a flannel material. In other words, if they're wearing their proper underwear, they're wearing long johns under a woolen uniform in the middle of the summer, in the heat and the humidity. Now, on some of these days, the temperatures aren't going to be too bad. June 26th, June 27th, the high temperature in those days was only 63 degrees. On June the 28th, it rises to 67. On June the 29th, it goes up to 72. And on June the 30th, it rises to 79. The high on July the 1st, when they get the day off, is 76. I'll give some more temperatures in a moment. So they might not be hiking through the hottest of summer temperatures in this 1863 weather, but we throw in the humidity. In their woolen uniforms, they're starting to sweat. How many of these men are suffering from chafing and prickly heat because of wearing these sweat-soaked uniforms when they march? And then they get caught in the rain. Some of the men talk that for days on end, their uniforms never totally dried out. They just got to a stage of dampness. How about their shoes? Who has good shoes and who doesn't after all of this marching? What about the socks inside those shoes? Is there any material left in their socks? How many holes do they have in their socks? How many times have they had to march through mud and puddles and streams without being given time to remove shoes and socks? All this is going to do is cause blisters. Are those blisters going to callus? Or are those blisters going to pop? Are those blisters going to bleed? How about the dust on dry days? They're all sweaty. Their uniforms are coated in dust. Their faces are coated in dust. They complain about having to breathe in the dusty air. It's terrible. The loads they're carrying. And the worst thing that I would want to be carrying is my musket. If it does have a sling to carry it over a shoulder, one shoulder is going to get tired. Then you'd switch it to the other. And then maybe you're just carrying it in your arms or in your hands. An ungainly piece of equipment to be carrying in all this is marching. How about their food? They're not eating 3 square meals a day. And when they do sit down to eat, whether it's going to be hardtack or there's going to be some kind of a beef jerky, hopefully they're getting to boil their cups of coffee. They're certainly not getting balanced meals from all of the proper food groups. How about their water? Where are they getting water? From streams, from lakes, from ponds? How many of those bodies of water might have algae in them, might be stagnant? Some of them are getting water from puddles. Hopefully some try to get water from wells, but at times on the march, the wells are guarded so the men won't get out of line, stop marching to fill up their canteens. So in some cases, once the water is gone from the canteen, when are they going to get a chance to fill it up again? How about insects? Inside their uniforms, X number of these guys are marching along with their pet insect. That's lice. These guys are marching and scratching. But how about ticks that some of them have picked up? How about flies? How about mosquitoes? it's got to be a creepy crawly infested march. And it's hour after hour, day after day. Cumulative breakdown is setting in a lot of these men. You have them suffering from dehydration. You have them suffering from heat exhaustion. You have them suffering from heat stroke. And because some of them are maybe picking and eating too much fresh fruit from orchards that they walk by, because maybe some of them are eating uncooked green corn, because maybe some of them are drinking water that is fouled from whatever source they got out of it. X number of these guys on the march, not only in the Union Army, but in the Confederate Army too, are suffering from diarrhea. The ranking commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee, was suffering from diarrhea as he commanded his army at Gettysburg. So this is not a fun situation for these men, but on they go. Looking at this map, this is the Union Army Corps positions on June the 30th. By June the 30th, our 6th Corps is sitting here at Manchester, Maryland. This is where they get their day off on July the 1st. As you can see, they are on the extreme far right of the Army of the Potomac. You can see where the other corps are spread out all the way to the 1st and the 11th Corps in the Emmitsburg area. You can see cavalry and infantry in the Hanover area, and you can see cavalry the night of June the 30th in the Gettysburg area. This is John Buford, and it's John Buford's cavalry. He will be into Gettysburg on the 30th, and on July the 1st will be the first Union soldiers to go into combat at Gettysburg. Part of our program this evening is going to be following in the 36-mile march of the 6th Corps to Gettysburg. This is an epic undertaking. Many historians consider this to be the greatest march during the Civil War. And in the lead, the distinction of being the first unit on the road, the lead unit on the march, is the 93rd Pennsylvania of Lebanon County. They will cover those 36 miles in just 17 hours. On the main street in Manchester, you see this road sign. This has to be one of the greatest understated roads historic markers that anybody would ever want to find. The 2nd Cavalry Division and the 6th Corps of the Army of the Potomac camped about Manchester June the 30th. Headquarters for Major General John Sedgwick was located nearby on Old Court School Road. And now this last sentence. On the night of July the 1st, the Corps left Manchester and went into battle at Gettysburg the next day. There's almost no greater understatement. To get from Manchester to Gettysburg to go into battle the next day, these men will march 36 miles in 17 hours. They will march through the night and into the next day. The historic march to Gettysburg starts approximately 10 p.m. July the 1st, and it will end approximately 3 p.m. July the 2nd. That's 36 miles in 17 hours. Now, I'm going to stop here a little bit again, and I'm going to just explain some of the numbers here. The 17 hours is 17 hours. That is in the 93rd Pennsylvania's history book, authored by Penrose Mark, who was the captain of Company D in the 93rd. The 36 miles that you see here is what is in the 93rd's history book. So those two numbers stick. Unless we're talking about other parts of this 14,000-man 6th Corps. depending on what book you are reading about this adventure, what magazine article, you are going to get differing numbers here. Some people say that the mileage should be as low as 32 miles. There are other people who claim that they marched as far as 42 miles. There are people who have actually hiked this as part of their Civil War bucket list. And I have an account of a national park ranger, 2 national park rangers, and a friend who hiked this march between Manchester, Maryland, and Gettysburg. And they said that they double-checked their figures and they walked 38 miles. If you go on to Bing or Google and you go into a map deal and you Bing or Google the distance on the highways of today between Gettysburg and Manchester, it comes out to be 30 miles on the nose. Well, depending on what mileage you're using is almost a who cares. They walked a long way in a short period of time. I'm going to read you a few passages here from the 93rd's history book. At 8 o'clock on the evening of July 1st, worn with the long and weary marches since June the 13th, the 93rd stretched their aching limbs in the shelter of a friendly forest. Scarcely had they thrown themselves upon the ground when Staff Officer Oliver reached General Sedgwick from the blood-baptized height of Gettysburg, announcing the death of General Reynolds and that the stupendous conflict had commenced, and requesting regimental commanders to address their troops in language becoming the grandeur of the crisis and bearing an order for the immortal sick to hasten to the defense, to strike for their altars and their fires, God and their native state. The drums beat, fall in. The order leaped from lip to lip, and a host is all astir. Swords and belts are buckled on, knapsacks slung, weapons grasped. Say not a cheer arose, not a murmur was heard. Feelings too profound for speech filled all hearts. Silently, solemnly, and majestically as the ocean tide, the men moved through the aisles of the forest on their way to Gettysburg. Staff Officer Oliver, who bore the message to General Sedgwick at Manchester, and who had ridden down 2 steeds and arrived on a 3rd one, who was lathered and foaming and had bloody flanks from cruel spurring, said, "General, you must be at Gettysburg by afternoon of tomorrow." Oliver knew by experience the distance and well ventured to say in parting that the task assigned and the time allotted was beyond the pale of human endurance, and he feared men, even with all the experience and energy and courage of such troops as he commanded, could not accomplish it. But General Sedgwick replied, "Say to General Meade, I will be at Gettysburg with my corps at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." And he was. What we're going to do now is to go through the march north in some slides along the present highways between Manchester and Winchester, Maryland, and then from Winchester, Maryland, north to Gettysburg. On this slide, Manchester is in the background. Here's modern highway. On the right, this is historic road trace. As we're following north on these slides, which as my wife was driving, I was taking out the front windshield of the car as we're headed north, they will show one particular point that you need to remember. Besides all of the problems of the marches that I mentioned earlier, watch these pictures because it is simply uphill and down dale. This is not a flat march along a well-graded highway, even as we have here today. This is a up and downhill march on dirt roads. passing farms that may have been there at the time of the 1863 march. Modern highway, old road trace. I like to think that that house was there, and that as the army marched past with the 93rd in the lead, people might have been out to give them water. People might have been on the porch cheering them on. Same thing with this old house. But notice the profile, uphill and down dale. We get into Westminster. I like this on the sign. Westminster is a partner town with Haida, Estonia, 4,294 miles that way. Glad we don't have to march that. Winchester is, if you follow this route north of the 93rd, is an extremely interesting little town. You might want to take some time to spook around there as you're following. Now, they started marching north sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. Many of the accounts say it took them about an hour to get ready after the 8 o'clock message was brought to General Sedgwick from Meade. But there's maybe a little bit of doubt about that. Supposedly, General Sedgwick was out in the lead a good distance ahead of the 93rd. How far ahead he was, I have no idea. Nobody mentions that in many of the accounts that I have read of this adventure. But Sedgwick is out in front, and I think he may have started about 9, the 93rd a bit later. Some of the soldiers at the very beginning of the march got onto the wrong road. They're going to have to do a counter march. This intersection that we're looking at right here, which is the intersection between Route 9, modern Route 97, and the Meadow Branch Road, heading off this direction, becomes very, very important. The 93rd wishes they would have been lined up in the turn lane, so when the light changed, they could have gone to the right. Nope, they were lined up in the straight ahead lane. When the light turned, they headed straight ahead. This straight ahead is going to cause a bit of a problem. General Sedgwick will get 3 separate orders about this march from General Meade at Gettysburg. The first order he received from Oliver, which Meade issued at 4:30, and it wasn't until Oliver arrived around 8 o'clock on the evening of July the 1st at Manchester to give the order to Sedgwick that he started everybody moving north. And that order said he was supposed to march to Winchester and then march to Taneytown, Maryland, and access Gettysburg through Taneytown. That means marching straight ahead. A second order arrived, and this order said that basically you're supposed to get here as fast as you absolutely can. So if you have any wagons that are with you on the march, get them off the road. Do not let any wagons impede the march. Get the men moving as quickly as possible. Maybe this adds a little bit more pace to the march. In that second order, Meade said to Sedgwick that you may use your discretion to take any side roads that you think might get you there sooner. Now you got to remember, if you're only starting your march sometime between 9 and 10 p.m., you're marching in the dark. As the accounts say, it's a moonless night. Bumping into the guy in front of you, the guy behind you bumping into you, not being able to see exactly where you're going, trudging along. And then somewhere around 3 a.m. in the morning, a third order arrives from Meade. And in this order, he says, I don't want you to go through Taneytown. I want you to swing over to the Baltimore Pike, and I want you to come into Gettysburg through Littlestown. It's a better road. You'll get here faster. Sedgwick decides he's going to agree with Meade on this. Only problem is the 93rd has marched straight ahead. How far down the road did they march straight ahead? Once again, it depends on whose account you read. 2 miles? 3 miles? 4 miles? They're down the road, let's just simply say, a piece ways. When an officer arrives at the front of the column and says, gone the wrong way, got to turn around and come back. The head of the column turns around and swings back. They do a counter march, which means the whole column from this point back comes to a halt. From this point forward, they're all waiting for the 93rd to get back to this intersection and turn right. Now, that would be turn left and head up the Meadow Branch Road. Finally, when everybody does that counter march, then these guys who are right here follow along. It's additional mileage, round trip anywhere from 4 to 8 miles, depending on whose account you're reading. And the time to do that counter march, they waste anywhere from 2 to 4 hours in doing that. But they're heading up Meadow Branch Road, which is the nicest part in today's world if you're going to be tracing this march. It really gets you away from modern traffic onto a nice backcountry road for a couple of miles, at least until you run into this. Meadow Branch Road is right here and would head directly through today's Carroll County Airport. Well, the airport does not have a sense of humor and will not allow anybody tracing the route of the 93rd and the 6th Corps to Gettysburg to cut right across the airport. You have to take a detour around. It's not difficult, but once you get around the airport, you're back to Meadow Branch Road for just a couple of 100 yards, and then you reach the Baltimore Pike. They are reaching the Baltimore Pike somewhere around dawn. Somewhere in this area, they will be given a rest. They will be told that they can start fires and start to brew coffee, which they do, except before many of the coffee pots are boiling, they're told, time's up, get up and let's get marching again. And in the accounts, it even talks about the officers walking through the area where the men are resting and kicking over the coffee pots so that the men won't linger until their coffee boils. And they are back on the road, and once again, uphill and down dale. Some of the men in the accounts talk about when they would top out one hill, they could look off into the distance and just see the next one that they would have to climb way out there in front of them as they toiled up the road. They'll eventually come to Union Mills, Maryland. And as this says, Union Mills on the night of July the 29th was the campsite for Jeb Stuart's wayward Confederate cavalry on their ride to Gettysburg. On the night of June 30th, Union Mills is the campsite for James Barnes' division of the 5th Corps. You'll notice that the historical marker only records who camped there on the way to Gettysburg. It doesn't record who marched through on an epic 36-mile, 17-hour jaunt. This stream right here is Pipe Creek. For any of you who are familiar with some of the vagaries of the Battle of Gettysburg, George Gordon Meade issued a document called the Pipe, or an order called the Pipe Creek Circular. It was a contingency plan that if things don't go right at Gettysburg, if they don't think this is where they want to fight, the Army will drop back and the Army will form on Parr Ridge, which is the high ground back here behind Pipe Creek. It was a circular that got to some of the Corps commanders, not to others. But once the battle got joined at Gettysburg on July the 1st, the Pipe Creek Circular went down the drain and the battle was fought there. Notice this welcome sign right here. Welcome to Pennsylvania. It is now roughly about 11 o'clock in the morning of July the 2nd. And right here in this road sign, it says Gettysburg 12 miles. When the Corps, the 93rd in the lead, came to the Gettysburg border, the Pennsylvania border, the Mason-Dixon line, and crossed from Maryland into Pennsylvania, the drums started to beat, the flags were unfurled, and the 93rd sang "Home Sweet Home" as they walked back into Pennsylvania. Music on the march, and this is an oddity about this whole trek north. Many of the soldiers who took part in it said that for the one and only time during the war when they were marching, music was playing frequently as regimental bands would set up along the road and start playing music, and the men would sing along with the songs. It kept them marching, it kept them going, and took some of the pain and agony out of the walk. Home Sweet Home is being sung as we march into Pennsylvania, uphill and down dale. Now, we get into Littlestown, Pennsylvania, and the 6th Corps is following in the footsteps of the 5th Corps that had marched through here the day before. I'm going to read an account for you from a man named Anderson. He was in the 5th Wisconsin, not in 93rd Pennsylvania, but he writes, as they approached Littlestown, we reached a part of the pike over which troops in advance of us had passed with their artillery and trains the day and night previous, and the road was covered with dust, 3, 4, 5 inches deep. Imagine that. Walking through dust of that thickness and churning that up to cling to your uniforms and face and for you to breathe in. The dust rose in great clouds and nearly stifled us. By this time, there was no music and no singing. We were fast reaching the limit of human endurance. Men reeled and staggered along as if they were drunken. Ever and anon, a rifle or musket would clatter on to the pike as the man who carried it collapsed and sank in a quivering heap in the midst of the roadway. He would be seized and dragged to the roadside, his musket laid beside him, and his comrades would resume their places in the ranks and struggle on. Was that man suffering from mere dehydration? Was he suffering from heat exhaustion? Was he suffering from heat stroke? Would he be picked up by an ambulance? Would he recover on his own and march along trying to catch up? Or would he never rise again because it was not a Confederate bullet or artillery shell that would kill him on the battlefield at Gettysburg? It was the heat stroke suffered during the march that killed him.
We have one question here. When he died, how much did he have artifacts on him?
Say it again? Well, anyway, this is downtown Littlestown, 2 taverns, and here we are approaching Route 15 at Gettysburg. The old 7-Eleven is right here. The modern Sheetz is behind these trees. And as we march over present Route 15, we get into the area of the Baker Farm. We started the night before on July the 1st at about 9 to 10 p.m. We are now in this area of the Baker Farm and Rock Creek at approximately 3 p.m. on the afternoon of July the 2nd. the men will drop down. Some of them instantly go to sleep. Some of them are dipping their feet and their faces into Rock Creek. Some of them are even going to cross the creek and socialize with soldiers who they realize that they are acquainted with, who have arrived in Gettysburg prior to them. Now, when they get to Gettysburg, you might think, well, that's enough for one day. It's not. When the 93rd gets to Gettysburg, they will get approximately an hour and a half to 2 hours to recuperate. Somewhere between 6 and 6:30, 5:30 to 6:30, this is going to happen. While resting, a staff officer suddenly appeared in the 6th Corps. General Sedgwick, without waiting, was with him, and without waiting for brigade or regimental officers, General Sedgwick sang out, "Fall in, boys, move quickly." Instantly the lines were formed, arms were taken, and following the old general right through Rock Creek and over the field and up the hillside, we were soon on Little Round Top. Did they come right up through this field, right up this hillside that I have in this photograph? Did they use any of the roadways that they were in the area that we would use today to get to the Little Round Top area? Granite Schoolhouse Lane, what we call Hospital Road today, what is called Blacksmith Shop Road, which would given them access to Wheatfield Road. They are led into position after that epic march and only a maximum of 2 hours of rest by this gentleman, John Sedgwick. Sedgwick will take them into a position that in the history book, Penrose Mark called Little Round Top. On today's battlefield, we call it Munshauer Hill. We are just to the right or to the north in the way we're looking from Little Round Top. This monument right here with the blue cross is a 93rd Pennsylvania monument. This monument sits where the 93rd was formed into battle line. I'm now standing on top of Little Round Top, and I'm looking across the territory that the 93rd will charge across through the John Weicker farm territory. Now, if we take a look at this map, we have here Pennsylvania Reserves, McCandless's brigade, Samuel Wiley Crawford's division of the 5th Corps. We have here the 93rd, two of its sister regiments lined up right here on Munshauer Hill. The 98th Pennsylvania is part of the 93rd's brigade, Nevin's brigade, but the 98th was led out of line, and they're going to come into the battle with the Pennsylvania Reserves. They are going up against the Confederate brigades, Anderson, Semmes, Kershaw, Wofford. These Confederate soldiers have already seen immense combat. They have come off of the southern extension of Seminary Ridge called Warfield Ridge. They have approached the Emmitsburg Road under artillery fire. They have fought their way across the Emmitsburg Road. They have in various combat fought their way through the Peach Orchard, across the Rose Farm, through the Trossel Farm, over the Stony Hill, through the wheat field. They had been pushed back, they had reformed, they had reattacked. Finally, their attack will drive United States regulars out of the wheat field, and they will be coming into what is called the Valley of Death between Houck's Ridge and Little Round Top and Munshauer Hill. If I go to this one, you'll notice a magnificent charge. And you'll notice that all the Confederate units are dropping back. At this point, I want to go back to a class that I was taking in 1993 with one of the licensed battlefield guides. It was during that time that I was studying to become a guide myself. And being a native of Lebanon, and knowing that the 93rd Pennsylvania is involved in this charge, we were on the battlefield on a Saturday morning, and we were standing on Munshauer Hill, and the guide was talking about this charge, and I made a comment about it because the 93rd, my hometown regiment, was right in the middle of this attack line. And the guide looked at me and said, "You are giving this attack more significance than it deserves. You are not interpreting the numbers correctly." He didn't want to make it seem as if it's an insignificant attack, because it's not. He didn't want to say that anybody who was killed or wounded in this attack was an insignificant casualty, because they were not. But what he wanted me to realize was what is at the bottom of the brigade plaque. Here we have the 93rd, here we have its sister regiments. At the bottom of this brigade plaque, it says casualties: killed 2 men, wounded 7, officers 44 men, total casualties 53. He said that by the remark that I made, that I was giving this attack more significance than it deserved. Yet if we see it right here on this map, wow, it looks like these Union soldiers are totaling these Confederate soldiers and driving them back in disarray and retreat. Well, yes, they are, but maybe no, they're not. I'll point out one thing here before we move on. The 102nd Pennsylvania did not take part in the historic march with the 93rd and the other regiments of the brigade. The 102nd was detached, and they remained back in Manchester, Maryland, on that ever popular duty of guarding wagons. I'll mention them in just a little bit. Now, we're going to go through this attack in picture form. Here's the 98th Pennsylvania Monument. It is the site of Gibbs Battery, the 1st Ohio Light Artillery, on the northern portion of Little Round Top. The rest of the brigade, with the 93rd, the 139th PA, and the 62nd New York, is through these trees over here in the distance, lined up on Munshauer Hill. United States regulars will fill in this distance, and during the attack, the 93rd said they were elbow to elbow with the 139th PA said they were elbow to elbow with the Pennsylvania reserves. But we're on Munshauer Hill, and this is the territory that we are going to attack across towards the Weichert farm. We'll just walk through this attack. We're looking to our left. The 98th and the Pennsylvania Reserves would be attacking off of Little Round Top and down through the Valley of Death, headed toward Houck's Ridge, off to our left or south. We turn ourselves and we keep attacking, driving towards the Confederates, firing volleys into them, They're firing back at us, but we're moving them. Now, we get to how significant was this attack? I'm standing to take this photograph at the extreme northern end of the wheat field. And the photograph is showing the western face of Little Round Top. Here's Gibbs Artillery Monument right here. The 98th Monument is over here. This is where the Pennsylvania Reserves charged from, including the 98th from the 93rd Brigade. This is Samuel Wiley Crawford's statue. Crawford, the division commander, will be in on the attack and leading this brigade in the attack. Now, I'm going to share with you something that was said by Confederate officers. They have fought their way through the Peach Orchard, the Stony Hill, the Rose Farm, the Trossel Farm, the wheat field, Houck's Ridge, and they are ready to charge up this segment of Little Round Top and win the battle, maybe? When this is said by a Captain Hillier of the 9th Georgia, the Federal position on the northern slope of Little Round Top was most formidable. The strongest natural position I ever saw. Our line emerged from the stumpy brush into a long, narrow, but straight opening which skirted the foot of Little Round Top. He's talking about this territory right here, which we know today as the Valley of Death between Houck's Ridge and Little Round Top. I could see to my right, I could see to my left, 35 or 40 battle flags. But I only saw from 30 to 50 men with each. On crossing this opening and going a little way up the rocky slope, our little attacking column hesitated. I heard no order to retreat and gave none. But everybody, officers and men, seemed to realize that we could go no further, that we could not carry the position. By common consent, without an order, we began to fall back. Major Henry D. McDaniel of the 11th Georgia states, the rout of the Union was vigorously pressed to the very foot of the mountain. Little Round Top is the mountain. The loss to the enemy was very great. Nothing but the exhausted condition of the men prevented them from carrying these heights. As it was, with no support of fresh troops, it was found impracticable to follow the enemy further, and we dropped back. No order given, but the Confederates go into a retreat. Now, with the next slide, I turn, and in the distance, we see Munshauer Hill. The 62nd New York, the 93rd Pennsylvania, and 139th Pennsylvania will charge off of this hill across this territory through the Weikert Farm out into the field beyond where I'm now standing. They're pouring volleys into the Confederates. Confederates are firing back, yet Confederates are retreating. Eventually, the three regiments will drop back to this distant stone wall. They figured that it was impracticable to set up shop out in that marshy field, so they dropped back to this stone wall. Now, what the guide who was teaching my class that day in 1993 was trying to get across in saying that I was giving more significance to this attack than it deserved was the casualty count. About a half a mile to the north of this attack is another Union counterattack taking place. A participating regiment in that counterattack was the 1st Minnesota. If you read the plaque on the 1st Minnesota monument, it states that 262 men from Minnesota charged Wilcox's Alabamians. When the counterattack was over, and when the counterattack had successfully stopped the Confederate advance on that portion of Cemetery Ridge, 47 unharmed Minnesotans dropped back to the crest of Cemetery Ridge. In that charge, the Minnesota men had lost 215 killed and wounded. Compare that attack to this attack. In this charge, the 62nd New York suffered 12 casualties. 1 killed, 11 wounded, 5.1%. The 139th Pennsylvania suffered 20 casualties. 1 killed, 19 wounded, 4.5% casualty rate. The 93rd Pennsylvania, Lebanon County's fighting infantry, suffered 10 casualties, 0 killed, 1 mortally wounded. That one man who was mortally wounded was Clarence Hartman. He would die of his wound suffered in the charge here at Gettysburg on July the 2nd on September 28th. Those 10 casualties of the 93rd account for 4.3% casualty loss. The 98th Pennsylvania, in its charge off of Little Round Top, will
Hey, Bob, you got muted.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me now?
yeah.
What was the last thing you heard me say?
The 98th.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
just leaving Westminster now.
All right. The 98th Pennsylvania suffered 11 casualties. They had brought 351 men into the fight, so their percentage of loss was 0.3%. The guide's point was that this charge is not as significant as it should be because the Confederates were already retreating. Now, there's one Confederate unit who is not happy with having to retreat. Wofford's brigade was angry that General Longstreet told them to retreat. Colonel Goodbryan of the 16th Georgia, whose men had come the furthest through this field, said, "I can and do assert most positively that the 16th Georgia was not driven back and that there was no enemy in front nor on the right to cause us to fall back. And I further assert that I was ordered back by a courier sent by the commanding General Longstreet, and that before going, seeing General Longstreet some distance in the rear, I rode to him and requested him not to order us back. But he repeated the order, and I retired." Now, the brigade will set up behind that stone wall. Here's the 139th monument. Here's the 93rd's monument. And here is the 62nd New York's monument. They are set up in a line behind the stone wall at the Weikert Farm Lane. Now we come to the question, If the charge wasn't significant, what was significant? And what did General Longstreet see that caused him to tell his Confederates to drop back? What General Longstreet saw on the top of this ridge line in front of us was fresh troops. Right here would have been the 62nd New York. Right here would have been the 93rd Pennsylvania. And over here would have been the 139th Pennsylvania. If Longstreet could have seen even further to the right along this ridge line, blending into Little Round Top, he would have seen McCandless's brigade of Crawford's division, Pennsylvania Reserves. What Longstreet would have seen forming on the ridge line in front of him would have been a total of 2,821 fresh troops. How many fresh troops did General Longstreet have at that point to commit to the battle? The number is exactly 0. He had no reinforcements, no reserves to send into the fight. And he's looking at almost 3,000 fresh Union soldiers on the ridge line in front of him. How many of them he could have seen at any one time, I don't know, but he saw fresh troops, including the 93rd Pennsylvania right here in the middle of this view. Now, the significance of all of this, besides the fact that these 6th Corps soldiers, after a 36-mile, 17-hour march, after not more than a 2-hour rest, came into combat, the significance is not their fighting prowess that day, but the fact that they got there. And the fact that they got there changed the complexion of the battle. When the 6th Corps started to arrive, when General Sedgwick reported in to General Meade that he was there, his troops were following shortly behind him, at least the lead of that 10-mile long march was shortly behind him, that told General Meade that, number one, he could release the 5th Corps to combat. Prior to that, most of the 5th Corps was being held as the Army Reserve. Now the entire 5th Corps can be released to combat. And the 6th Corps, with the exception of the 93rd Brigade, which went into combat, as it arrives, it will become the new Army Reserve, and 6th Corps units will be distributed all over the Union fishhook where they are needed. On the night of July the 2nd, the men will try to get some rest. Many of them will be up all night dealing with wounded. On July the 3rd, there will be no direct combat for the 93rd except for helping to try to knock out Confederate snipers out here in the distance who are taking pot shots in at the men of the 139th and the 93rd and the 62nd New York. So there will be some dealing with Confederate sharpshooters. At the end of the day, after Pickett's charge, the 93rd will not take part in this, but some of the members of the 139th will move out, and they will be going against some Georgians in the Wheatfield sector as the Confederates are being pulled back even further after the failure of Pickett's charge. I'm going to end by talking quickly about the 2 monuments that the 93rd has on the battlefield. This monument is the first 93rd monument placed on the battlefield. in its second position. This monument was originally on the Weikert Farm Lane. It now rests on the top of Munshauer Hill, where the 93rd went into battle line to start their charge. This monument was financed by the G. Dawson Coleman family of Lebanon. G. Dawson Coleman, the great iron ore baron, iron industry baron of Lebanon fame. It's about a 7-foot high monument. Reading this inscription right here, this lets you know that the monument was not where it was sitting to begin with, because this talks about the monument now being placed on the line where they formed into battle. This is the second 93rd monument at the site of the first monument's position. About a year after they put their first monument on the battlefield, the state of Pennsylvania said that they would give to every Pennsylvania state regiment that fought at Gettysburg $1,500 to build a monument on the battlefield. Well, the 93rd didn't care if they already had a monument financed by the Coleman family. They were going to take the state's $1,500 and put a second monument on the battlefield. They had this 15-foot high monument sculpted, and they decided they wanted to put it on the exact same rock that the first monument had sat on. They removed the first monument, took it up to the top of Munshauer Hill, and they placed the second monument on that rock. It's a beautiful monument. If you are on the battlefield at Gettysburg, any Pennsylvania regimental monument that has the Pennsylvania state seal in bronze affixed to the monument, that tells you that that is a monument that was placed there per the $1,500 given by the state to that regiment. You'll notice on the base of the monument is an inscription carved into the stonework. The inscription says July 2nd and 3rd, 1863. This larger monument did not fit onto the rock the way the rock was configured for the first monument. Stone cutters were brought in, and they had to cut away portions of the rock to get it down to a base large enough to accommodate the second monument. There were two lines of inscription in the rock above this one. The first line read 3rd Brigade, 3rd Division. The second line read 6th Corps. What happened to that rock? It became what I like to consider Gettysburg's most sacred battlefield litter. The rock that was cut away was just simply thrown off to the side, and it remains there today. And you can walk up to it and you can read the inscription on it. Here it says 3rd Brigade. Here's the beginning of 6th Corps. Here you can see some more writing on this rock flipped upside down. When you look at the rocks, you can also see where they use drills to drill in and split the rock to cut it away. On the second rock, it says, on the second monument, it says, after charging with the brigade from the right of Little Round Top in the evening of July 2nd and assisting in the repulse of the enemy and the capture of a number of prisoners, the regiment retired to and held this position until after the close of the battle. The 93rd has a creed, and I'm going to end the program by reading the creed of the 93rd. But before I do that, I'd like to read something from Penrose Mark's History of the 93rd. The word I'm going to be pronouncing is Calvary, the place where Jesus was crucified. I am not reading cavalry, horse soldiers. It's Calvary. Gettysburg is the Calvary of freedom. When we think of humanity as being crushed by sin and look for a remedy, we begin at the Garden of Gethsemane and find the conclusion at Calvary. So when we think and speak of oppression, class, and caste in America, we look for a remedy. We begin at Harper's Ferry with old John Brown, and we find the answer in Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. So we can say, for humanity, saved at Calvary. For America, saved at Gettysburg. And the 93rd played its part. Its creed was, we believed our country was good enough to live for, to die for. And we might add, to march for. Thank you for tuning in. And that's the end of tonight's program. The 93rd Pennsylvania and its part in the epic march of the 6th Corps to Gettysburg and the part that it played in the combat.
Okay.